So the new Twitter is buggy, man. It's buggy.
I like it.
I like it. I like the design, and I like it, but it's it has bugs.
What is buggy? Is this like
The data fetching.
high follower count or high whatever bugs?
Oh, I'm not there, man.
You're not there.
No, not there. Not until the it's like you have a K in it somewhere.
Yeah.
I posted a question, like a newbie React question, and it was like 30 minutes later. I get so distracted by Twitter, so I have to like turn it off sometimes. I have the self-control app that I use to literally block it. But this one I was just curious. It was the like some key thing with like a list in React, unique keys. And I asked kind of a newbie question. I knew the answer in some sense, but I wanted to, I was still confused about it. So I asked it.
What was the question?
And I was like, I knew people were going to respond. I knew that's the kind of thing. Sometimes you tweet out something and it's, within 15 seconds, there's going to be like 3 replies. So when I went back 30 minutes later and I didn't have anyone who had replied to me, and then I checked my notifications and it was all the old stuff, I was like, I'm not sure. I hit reply and I was like, I'm pretty sure this is like twitter.com, bug. And I like refreshed. And I had to do like a Command-Shift-R refresh. And then like my old notifications loaded, and all of a sudden, bloop, and then there was like 8 new notifications. So that was interesting.
This reminds me of an Aziz joke. I saw Aziz do stand-up like years ago.
Yeah.
Before I think he was like popular. I knew who he was.
Yeah.
But I don't think he was at the level he is now. It was at, what's the comedy place?
Yeah, Comedy Cellar.
Comedy Cellar.
Yeah.
And he was talking about how you send a girl a text message, and then she doesn't reply. And it's like, oh, what's wrong with my phone? Is the network down? What's going on? It's like the only time you ever think of this. So that's I wrote a tweet and no one replied. What's wrong with Twitter? Twitter must be buggy.
I actually saw his new stand-up on Netflix. It was pretty funny.
That's good.
It was pretty funny. But no, I was right. So it wasn't that the girl didn't respond. I knew that there was plenty of girls out there who were sending me little emoji hugs and kisses. The tweet was, why doesn't React default to using index as a unique key in lists? Come on, that's going to get responses.
Yeah. Wait, but
you know how, so when you do like I'm writing like a dynamic table of contents, because that's what I do every time I build an SPA for the last 10 years. And you just want to go over my dynamic nav, map each one to an LI, right? And then React's going to render it, but it's going to complain. It's going to give you a big red warning in the console. And it's going to say every child in a list needs a unique key. And so you go and you do key equals, item.title or index or item.id or whatever. Mm-hmm. So that was the bug. And that was my question.
Why doesn't it use index?
Because in Ember, we don't do that. We don't. I think when's the last time you passed in key to a list of things in Ember in a template?
When I'm banging my head against a list. I think in Ember defaults to it marks the object, right?
I think one time Tom said, he literally said that there's a template transform that rewrites it to have as index and then key equals index, curly index. So I think it's literally doing a default of an index.
I thought it was ID. I thought the index thing seems buggy.
Yeah, I get why it's buggy, but maybe it's ID. So maybe it's actually that's what Chris Freeman said on Twitter. He said by default it's not index, it's a reference to the object or something like that.
I think it GUIDs for the object and then it uses that to try. I'm currently in an Ember app and I'm fighting something like this where I have an array of the hash helper.
Yeah.
And that's regenerating.
Yeah.
And it's causing my whole list to re-render.
Interesting.
Because those things, those objects aren't stable. And so I don't want to get into the weeds, but I'm currently dealing with something like this.
But I've don't think I've ever had a bug where it's been fixed by doing key equals. I don't think I've ever had to do that.
I would say that every time I run into this in Ember, it actually reminds me that most of the time I'm eaching over models.
And those are
have
identity. They're stable,
which is really nice.
It's super nice.
And
turns out object stability and referential stability
is a good thing.
Is a good thing, as we've been banging our heads this morning against unstable references with React hooks.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting, right?
Yeah.
You wouldn't really understand that until you went through the pain points of it, but there's certainly nice things about this dot or whatever being stable, or having your data in a separate layer from the rendering. So yeah, it just seems like one of those things. It's like, why? So I totally understand why a list needs, children in a list need identity. If you remove the third one, how do you know to re-render and be smart about re-rendering and all that stuff? But in this case, I just had a static list. And I think a lot of times you have a static list, because if you give me a static list of data and you like each over it or map over it, it's just like, I just want to render it. And I'm using, to me, it's weird that you go from like li getting started, li installation, li overview. And then I just want to put like those things in an array and map them to li. And now I have to do key. That feels like a weird step.
I agreed. I would think the default would be some no key and super inefficient. So if the list changes, you're going to lose everything and re-render.
Or it's like actually buggy, but like it tells you when it's buggy. Or yeah, super inefficient. Why not start there, right?
Yeah.
Now the default is index. It does render. It actually does work, but I think it can be buggy. But then it warns you. It gives you a warning. But the warning is like, you have to fix this. It's like super red. It's not like we've de-optimized your build because the package size is 900 kilobytes or whatever. It's like you're doing React wrong.
Yeah. Any red in the console while you're developing is you're fixing it right away.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting. So what did you do? Did you just add a key of title?
Key equals item. I did like item.title as like a string. But like I've had to do this every time now. Every React, we've built a total of 4 React apps now. And because they've all involved lists, we've really literally run into the edge cases with hooks and things like this. And it bothers me. It's just annoying.
Yeah.
But I get it, but it just feels weird. It feels like first of all, if the default is to use index and that default gets you, it's like what we were talking about the last 2 weeks, right? It's like if the default gets you there and maybe becomes a hot path at one point that you need to fix, that's fine. But for now, if it works and it works, let me keep going. Like those are the kinds of things that just like slow you down.
Is the point of the warning is that they can only recognize this is going to be a problem at render time, so they need to warn you there?
So
because like imagine they had an observer on the array and they could say something like, hey, this array is used in a list and you're changing it, so now you should fix this index thing.
Right.
But if they can't know that and the only like...
But yeah, if it never changes, like, who cares?
I know, but arrays change. I mean,
no, they're data structured. Like, no, it's a static data structure. It's like,
in your case it is.
It is.
But
and also in like lots of cases.
A lot of times when I'm rendering lists, I'm like fetching things from the server.
Yeah, a lot of times.
Adding new things, removing things.
Sometimes. Not when you're building a table of contents, that doesn't change.
Also, why not, like, I would like a lint rule here.
Yeah.
But maybe that's hard. Maybe you have to like evaluate the code to know that.
Oh yeah, why doesn't it have a lint that just says key equals? But they can look at your...
But they might have to evaluate the code, because if you like
they can lint.
Have a map that then renders a component and there's like some dynamic pieces there.
But what if you're rendering an li and the only attribute you have is like class name or something like that? Also, I hate class name because now I go back to like Ember templates and I start doing class name and then it doesn't work. It really bothers me.
I think, can't you use class names in Ember? I think that still works.
We should make a thing that lets you use class names in React, so then you use class names everywhere. Anyway, so I found that was weird, but no, React is fun. You said this week one point you were like, oh man, I miss handlebars, or like I love writing handlebars templates right now. You're like happy to be back in a template.
Yeah,
it's kind of nice, right? It's like it's kind of like its own environment. It's kind of like you feel safe when you're in a handlebars template. There's something about that.
Yes, nailed it. Like you definitely feel safe. You're not thinking about how's this thing rendering, how's this thing re-rendering. Just given this data, this is a display of the data.
Stale state, none of that. None of that stuff.
Yeah. I like the things I really like about handlebars are so the angle brackets with the @ sign, properties versus attributes. That's nice.
Clarity. Yeah.
And then like F statement.
Yeah.
I don't ask for a lot here. Come on.
Yeah, that's not true. No, it's true. That's funny. So we were playing around with React this morning, and we hit this like stale state bug, and we were doing some Googling, and when hooks first came out, Ryan Florence had this tweet that was kind of like, people keep throwing around set interval example with hooks as kind of some smear in Hook's eye, like because it's an easy way to run into stale state using React hooks. And the answer is like, oh, you're not thinking about this right or whatever. Which is like, I get what he's saying, but it's also kind of lame to say that because it's just, there's a reason people are running into it. It's violating some of their expectations, right? People aren't stupid. It's just, and I get it. There's a new paradigm that you have to learn, but even still,
we've also been critical of Ember for that stuff. So it's not fair we would never say, oh, you're just not doing it the Ember way.
Right.
So
right.
We have to live by this.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we can cast blame in all directions. It's back to this whole thing where you have this like free floating variable and you use set interval or set timeout, which when called creates a function which plucks state at the time it's called and puts it onto, what's the part of JavaScript that's not really part of JavaScript is the event loop. That's like not actually part of the core JavaScript engine, but it's like how callbacks run in an environment.
Not part of the JavaScript language.
It's not part of the runtime. It's not even, because JavaScript is part of the single threaded.
It's like part of the runtime in the sense that V8
the environment.
They all have this, but like JavaScript, the language has
no notion of that.
And didn't you
actually set interval and set timeout they're not even JavaScript language features. Surprisingly, they are
part of like the runtime
APIs from the environment, whether it's the event loop in the browser or like libuv in Node or whatever.
Didn't you worked on an app once that did not have, it was a JavaScript app with literally no event loop.
It was Apple TV. It was an Apple TV app. So when you build Apple TV, you have like the equivalent of V8, and then like you bring in a library that calls like set timeout because it's JavaScript, right? And it like didn't work. And it was like, you don't have set timeout in Apple TV. It's like, what? Yeah, that was super weird. JavaScript's so weird, man, right? Isn't it so weird? And like all this bundling stuff we've been dealing with, it's like crazy. So when you call set interval, the function's created, and then like this is kind of how I started making sense of it, which is like you have this thing over here, right? Which is like the event loop, and like that function which refers via a closure to a value at that point is on the event loop. And then like React's going to keep rerunning the render function a million times whenever it wants to. And so even if you're changing the state over here, like this is not changing because there's no connection between these two anymore. Yeah. That's the thing.
Yep. There's no reference.
There's no reference. It is, there's no reference. There's nothing connecting the two. So that's why you can run into stale state when doing things like asynchronous callbacks, which, Dan EmberMap has this wonderful post about explaining this and some solutions and thinking in hooks and all this stuff. But that is a confusing point. And then, you can use a ref. That's the other kind of confusing thing is like refs in React are like these constant references, and they're used to be to get a hold of a handle on a DOM element, but really they're like more general than that. They're like about stability and stuff. And so, there's a lot of times you reasonably want to be able to have a stable reference to something. And one way to solve this problem is to use a ref so that the function that you create still has a pointer back. And when it invokes, it actually is like going to ask the current context for that thing. So then we were like, well, why not always do that? But then you quickly get away from a lot of the benefits of the design of hooks, right? But it's kind of like, from a design perspective, you kind of want that. You kind of want like one way to do it and you never hit unexpected things. It's like weird that there's two ways to call a set state. In my mind, that's weird too. That's like a concession of the API. Yeah. And then now there's basically like you can conceive of two ways of getting things too, right? There's two ways to call set state, and then there's like you can just get a variable if you just get it with a free variable like a reference, or you could like imagine encapsulating all this logic in a new version that's like instead of just count, you get like get count, and then if you get count, that's another way to have a reference to this thing that's on like the event loop stack, so that it gets the fresh version of the state there. And then it's like, well, why can't we always do that? And then like, we're like, kind of, why does this never happen in Ember? And then you realize it's because like in Ember, all the data is on a property on this object, and this is like a stable object reference. So it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter how many times like the template is re-rendering or whatever. You can always just like this dot foo, which is why you can call like this dot set count 5 and then like this dot count, and it's going to be right because like there's no it's just an object reference thing or whatever.
Yeah, I guess too, like Ember could, if it wanted to, delay that set, but it doesn't. It thinks of it, it's like you said, it's a stable object.
It could if it want to, but it's not by design. It it also cannot. Whereas by the design of hooks, just by the fact that you get literally a JavaScript variable that could be a primitive, you don't get it.
Yep.
And we realized it wasn't even just that it was a primitive. I think we thought first it was like, oh yeah, if count is just a Boolean, like the function is going to close over that Boolean and it's like not going to have a reference. But even if the state is an object, as soon as you call set state, you're done because you've replaced the object, and so you no longer have a stable reference, which is why useRef exists.
Stable reference is a really good way to phrase it.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it's not about primitives, which I think I was confused about. It's about having a stable reference to a state that survives re-renders, and as soon as you call set state, and then if you use state with an object and you just do like object dot count equals 10. The problem there is that the app is not going to re-render because React doesn't know anything's changed.
Right.
So in that case, you would get the right value, but your thing wouldn't re-render, like in the alert message or whatever. So that was just all kind of interesting learning the things there. It made me want to look more at Svelte. I feel like Svelte tried to, some of the arguments for hooks was the composability argument, which is totally valid, but then also like simplicity, which is like working with variables and functions and avoiding this. And to me, some of that, you lose the benefits of some of that with some of the edge cases that we've run into, which might not even be edge cases. It's really more just like
the fact that we've hit this,
and we're not React developers.
Yeah. And we keep hitting this is tells me that
it's just part of what you have to learn. It's part of the API.
It's a React model.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. And it feels kind of like a bummer. And I think maybe the Svelte approach, like you could imagine, let count, set count equals use state, and then all that stuff. If you had a compiler step that like turned it into objects, those could maintain the reference. There could be a stable reference there such that it always pointed to what you would think of. Like if you were working in an Excel document and it would just be always what you think. Yeah. I think that's kind of what Svelte is going for. So that's kind of an interesting thing where it's like React's trying to meet people where they're at. It's like JavaScript. Svelte is like not, it is JavaScript, but it's also like, I don't, it's not really JavaScript. It's kind of like, it's like its own language.
But you're saying this because there's a compile step.
There's a compiler step that changes it. So like when you do like let x equals and then you do like $x, I mean, you're still writing valid JavaScript code, but what it does is like very different. Different enough that you're effectively learning a new like domain specific language, basically. So maybe that's better. If you're gonna say we have to get rid of this, we have to get, we want to just use functions and variables, and like the benefits of like lexical scope and closure. We want those, but still be able to do all this reactivity stuff. Then maybe like you need to go to a compiler or something like that. But it also reminds me that like it also makes me think of just like it doesn't seem like it's gonna be. It's like Elm. Right? It's like a one step before Elm. It's like, oh, we have to solve this at this, but then like no one's going to use Elm. Everyone's writing JavaScript. So that makes me think like, no, let's figure it out. Let's meet the developers where they're at, So it's just kind of interesting.
I guess one of the questions is like, are we sure that the benefits of hooks outweigh the downsides? Like maybe like Ember components, the composability in Ember components is rough.
Yeah.
Right. It's rough.
Yep.
That not in the template system, but in the actual component JavaScript file.
Right.
But man, having this reference and just being able to set state on it and pluck state off it is like pretty nice. And
super nice.
So like maybe the trade-off in going to these hooks is not, maybe we do this for a while and we end up, so I guess we should say that in your case, you ended up doing like a use.
So this is the thing. So I think part of the argument for hooks, so there's two things I want to say in response to what you just said. First is like when we actually coded this, we're like, okay, we made kind of like we ended up creating a ref and using an effect to make sure that our like callback was synced with the data as it changed, so that no matter what the data happened, if there was something on the event loop that was going to happen in 3 seconds, if the state ever changed, we like synced the callback with the state change, which is like the whole mental model behind how hooks let you sync effects with state, just like old React let you sync rendering with state. Like rendering and state has always been in sync by design because you just put like curly count and like boom, React takes care of that. Inner HTML is always going to be in sync with your state. And now with hooks and like use effect, you have a chance to do that for like callbacks. That's kind of like the high level. That's like the big idea. but it's like confusing and it's hard, and like there's parts where it violates your expectations, which is what this is all about. So once we kind of went down that road and created a ref that had stability, we had to understand why that was happening in the first place. Then create a ref that has stability, wrap in a callback, and then we had it working. And then what's cool, it is cool that you can just basically copy and paste those like 8 lines of gunk, put it in like a use timeout hook, and now I can just call use timeout, use my timeout, and pass in a callback, and boom, it's going to work as I would have expected set timeout to work. And so there's an argument there, which is like, right, hooks are these lower level things, but they let you build the higher level things. And once you have the higher level things, then people's expectations won't be violated. They won't hit these quote edge cases because like that's going to take care of it. First of all, if that's true, then they should be honest about that. I mean, they kind of are honest about that, but like the reality is when you talk about the benefit, when the announcement came out and you read the guides, they're not talking about, okay, so like the core hooks take care of these cases. When you run into these cases, you won't be able to do what you think with just these. But you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
they could have been more honest about that, I think. Or like, yeah, it's like there's a missing piece, but it's supposed to be. It's like a low level thing that lets you build the medium level things that you need to actually just like be productive without running into these edge cases. But that middle piece is like not there. It's like left up to the community.
Yeah, I mean, maybe there is like a community solution here that takes time, right? Running into these cases with hooks, but something does emerge that's React hook library, and we get a timeout function from that, an interval function. The thing that kind of rubs me the wrong way about that is like, as a JavaScript developer, I expect set timeout to work.
I know, but you said something good. You were like, if Ember tells me like the way to update state is like calling this.set, and then I need to use this.get, like I'm just gonna do that, and I'm never gonna run an issue, and that's fine.
And I don't care.
You actually don't care.
Ember's telling me what to do.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
I'm not gonna get a bee in my bonnet.
Yeah, you'd rather just be told what to do and not run into bugs. Whereas if you tell me this is just JavaScript, and then I try to do just JavaScript and it doesn't work as I expect, and then you tell me, oh, but you weren't thinking about this right, that's going to bother me. So I'd rather have one or the other, right? I'd rather either have here's where it works and here's where you still have to think about it, or React uses JavaScript, but then there's some parts of JavaScript that are fundamentally kind of misaligned with the way we do declarative rendering in React. And so when you have to do asynchronous things, do it like this. When you have to call set timeout or use this instead, it's fine,
Yep.
And then you also get benefits. It's not like, oh, why are we doing that? Like JavaScript already has that. Well, he shows in his blog post, like there's a great example of how you like the timeout with like the use interval. You can like change the interval and like connect it to like a slider, and you can change it and it is always in sync. So it's like the effect is in sync with the state. That's like a beautiful thing. Set timeout is not capable of that. You have to write that yourself. So if that was included, that's like a huge benefit. Right?
Yeah.
It's cool.
Yeah.
Super cool. But for you to understand that, maybe it's just because we're new to it also, but like I think it's confusing.
No, I mean I've Googled these things we run into, and the Stack Overflow answers are just rewrite your app to push all this state outside of your component.
Yeah, so that was another thing that you said, which was interesting, which is like people were saying, right, so you have state, and then you have some like asynchronous delayed callback, and it has stale state. What do you do? And like, yeah, you'll see answers that are like, we spent the time this morning to figure out how could we have let's say you come into a component that has a lot of state management stuff going on, and you just want to like log something in a second with the latest value of state. You should be able to do that you should be able to extend that component and do that without touching any of the existing state management. Whereas like the stuff you found was like, oh, well, if you just passed it in, it would always be, or if it was in a Redux store, it'd always be, but like that's not a good answer. So
yeah.
So there's a lot of confusion, I think, out there about it. So it's pretty interesting, though. But yeah, I like object references and stable references. They buy you a lot,
Yes.
They make certain things easy. They certainly can make things hard, too. But it's just not as one-sided as people make it sound, right? They're good for certain things,
Yep.
I guess we'll save the questions for the end, yeah?
Sure. Torture people, make them listen through the whole episode.
Right. Just ESPN website. Do you remember what that was about?
Oh, yeah. I was listening to a podcast with a bunch of the folks that started the like started ESPN.com and their vision for it and everything. And they were talking about they said the year, I don't remember. It might have been like 2002, 2000, something around there. They had this vision of getting a bunch of newspaper writers to write for a website, which at the time was just like, that's crazy. Why would they go down to a website when they have this giant newspaper platform? And one of the guys, I think like the main content guy, was saying like, in order for this to be successful, we have to have beautiful sports images. We have to have great typography, custom typography. It has to look beautiful because we're going to have great writers writing. And he was saying that his tech team just complained about this. They said that like we can't do images. That's just like dial-up modems won't be able to load them. And I just laughed at this because it's like we keep hearing these arguments, right? Like back then there absolutely
Images
were a
limiting factor,
right? There absolutely were technical constraints. If you had a slow modem, you couldn't load big images. But like it turns out that like they were right. Like building a good readable website requires these things, and ESPN.com was super successful.
Yeah.
So they knew like they had like the product vision where, and it just, I just,
the whole performance thing.
Today, what is it? It's bundle size and all this. And it just made me think like, like maybe this stuff maybe the technical constraints aren't there. And it's, there are folks that are not thinking of these things, but they have a bigger vision. Mm-hmm. And it might be okay to relax some of those technical constraints.
Right. Like the conventional wisdom would say, if you make users wait, 8 seconds for your big website to load and you have like this big 3D interactive thing, like you're just doing everything that's wrong with a modern web. But
you have to have a performance budget and it has to be 200 KB.
Yeah.
But like it turns out like no, like someone that wants to read an article by like a famous national writer, like they're okay waiting for an image to load, for the typography to load. So,
right. Interesting.
Yeah.
That's good. And that's just the product stuff is so important there. And also like people always talk about like marketing or like news websites, CNN.com, and like you open it and it's like ads everywhere and pop-ups, and like recipe websites are like the worst. But that's not a bundle size thing. That's like their use of modals and basically my point is it comes back to the user experience, which is what you're saying, right? And it's like, maybe that's what's important to consider.
Yeah, just made me think like, like there are certain situations where you do have a technical constraint and it does matter. Yeah. But maybe not.
You make them up. People self-impose them.
Yeah. Sometimes. Or maybe you hear something from another group that says 200 KB and you apply that to your website. But like, I don't know. Early days ESPN.com.
Visionaries or you're going to miss out on some of those.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. That's cool. CSB React.
So in doing a bunch of React, one of the things that I found really cool was that in GitHub issues, people will post issues and then like the first reply from a maintainer is always, do you have a Codesandbox? And then people set them up, and it's been super helpful in learning. Also Spectrum, in their like React testing library, there's just a whole bunch of Codesandboxes there.
Yeah, you really have been liking React testing library.
And you can they get embedded in the page, and it's just there's something about having like an example that you can play with that's not like a GitHub repo that I have to pull down, install, run, but like something I can just open in the browser, play with, see what they did. And that's something I'm really, really liking. It's like really helping me learn this stuff.
That's cool.
So yeah, Codesandbox is it's really impressive.
That's cool. There was, last time I checked, there was an Ember one, but it involved all Ember CLI. I think it would be good to have one that was basically more like Ember Twiddle.
Yeah.
We have Twiddle, but Twiddle is not Codesandbox. So it'd be nice to have a Codesandbox version that's like not.
Right. Twiddle gets you into trouble because Twiddle runs in the browser.
Yeah.
So you lose the whole Ember CLI build step thing.
But if you wanted something without that, I think the React versions, the boilerplate ones are just the client side version. So
they just run in the browser. There's no.
So that's fine. That's not the problem with Twiddle, is that it runs in the browser, right? The problem is that it's
no. It runs in the browser, so it loses all the file system stuff.
Yeah.
That is so common with Ember add-ons
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Ember apps. So maybe we would
But I'm saying it would still be good if you wanted to show off Ember animated to be able to run it in a Codesandbox, but not have Ember CLI, and just as a quick thing, the way that the React demo works, because you could do that with Ember. It's just that it's not easy.
Can you?
Well, like the script tag version or whatever, like the old version of Ember.
Can you do that?
Yeah, I mean, you should be able to. I guess you have to like compile the template, but you can have the template compiler run in the browser. It would just be nice if we had that, because it would be a faster thing, right? It's like you don't. Last time I tried to start a new Ember Codesandbox, it was like basically didn't work. It like timed out, didn't work. It's like trying to run all of Ember CLI is too much.
I set one up for Storefront, and I would share it with people, and when I loaded it, I would have to reload it a few times to get it to work, and it would work for a few hours, and then I'd share it, and the person would have to reload it a few times.
That's an example where we don't need Node, we don't need NPM. You just need to you need to load Storefront's code, but it could be from in a script tag pointing to unpackage. And that's it. You don't need the Codesandbox itself to rebuild anything if it can do it on the client.
I wonder if Ember is tied into Ember CLI. The whole Ember workflow is tied in enough to Ember CLI that you actually need Ember CLI.
Yeah, I don't know. It would be nice to have it to work, though. It would make it feel better.
Yeah.
Sure. But yeah, it's really cool. It's
something, it's like, man, like definitely for Storefront too, like having this and being able to share code would be awesome.
Yeah, totally. Hey everyone. So I want to take a quick break to thank a sponsor for this week's episode. It's actually our first sponsor of the show, and that is TrueCoach. And TrueCoach is actually hiring Ember developers. I got a chance to sit down with Alex Ford, their lead front-end engineer, and I wanted to share a bit of that conversation with you so you can hear about what they're looking for. Cool, man. What's the weather like over there?
It's lovely. It just got into the 80s.
Wow.
And it's late June.
So tell me about the positions that you all are hiring for right now.
We are looking to hire positions for our web team. So we're looking for Rails engineers. We're looking for Ember and JavaScript engineers.
What's the main thing that the app does? What does it look like, and who uses it?
We provide a workout builder and a set of templates for you to create programs that you can assign and individualize for your client. And a client typically works from a mobile device, right? Mm-hmm. I'm a client, I'm in a gym, probably have spotty Wi-Fi, if any Wi-Fi whatsoever, and open up the app, and I have a list of, say, 7 or 8 workouts to do that day with demo videos, and do them, maybe record myself, message my coach, hey, here are my results, this was super hard, I'd like to try this. And so we're really trying to solidify the communication gap and the feedback cycle between a coach and a client.
What would be one of the first things that a new Ember dev on the team would be working on?
We really love to start engineers off with testing. I'm hoping that by the time somebody starts, we get to focus on something from scratch. Mm-hmm. A brand new feature, we're looking at volume tracking, which means like tracking sets, reps, weight, tempo, and nutrition tracking, third-party integrations with, say, HealthKit and MyFitnessPal.
Wow, you weren't kidding about the feature list that y'all have.
We just want to build application code. Ember has solved so many of those hard problems for us that we can just really focus and hone in on that.
That's so cool. Tell me a little bit about what it's like to work at TrueCoach.
We hire honest and transparent people who love building a product and who are customer-centric, but don't take themselves too seriously. Our co-founders are so bought into Ember, which for an Ember dev is fantastic. And they want to continue to grow our Ember team, which is one of the more ambitious parts of our platform, of our app suite.
Tell me a little bit about some of the people that you work with. I know Casey, actually cool story about TrueCoach, which used to be called Fitbot. Casey, the co-founder who was the original Ember engineer on the app, I still remember one of the first kind of big companies that for me was big of someone using Mirage in their Ember app, and that was Fitbot and Casey, and he kind of sent me a Twitter message saying, this was like soon after like Mirage first came out, and he was like, Fitbot is an Ember app that uses Mirage. And I was like, what? And I went to the website and I looked at it, I was like, this is real? Like, I can't believe that. It's so cool. And that's kind of how
cool.
I first met Casey. And ever since we've hung out at the Ember comps, and last year I got to hang out with all you all, and we had lunch together, and it was an awesome team. So yeah, why don't you talk about some of the actual people you work with?
One of my favorite people to work with is Emily. She was our second Ember hire. It was so obvious that we need to hire her immediately because of how great of a person is and her product knowledge just right out of the bat. And it's someone who just picked up Ember having known React from code school and just really ran with it, worked on it for probably about 1.5 years, and then jumped over to the React Native app.
That's really cool, and I also think it's a testament to y'all's culture, because not everyone who's fresh out of a boot camp can be successful at every job. There's lots of places that aren't set up for those kinds of people to be successful. So that tells me a lot about how y'all are supporting each other, supporting new hires, and the fact that someone can work there for multiple years and grow in their own career at one place, I think is pretty unique these days. And the whole team is there in Boulder?
We are, yeah. We're all here in Boulder. We're looking to hire in Boulder in Colorado. We've got a few folks who live in Denver if you're into more of a bigger city scene, and we've got a flexible work from home policy, which tends to work really well for our team right now. So it's really cool being in Colorado right now. At the Dinosaur.js conference, there was an electricity. It really feels like an emerging tech market.
If folks are interested and want to learn more about the job posting, where should they go?
I think just check out bit.ly/TrueCoachDev. That's going to link you to our engineering culture. If you think that sounds interesting, there's a link below. Just click the We're Hiring link. Yeah, check it out.
Awesome. We'll make sure to link that in the show notes as well. Alex, thanks so much for your time, and I look forward to seeing you again at maybe EmberConf next year.
Appreciate you having me on.
Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Bye, Sam.
I have this thing here about, I was trying to remember what was happening when I wrote this down. I've seen teams spend 1 week getting Webpack set up. I've seen things you people wouldn't even believe. It was when we were working on this roll-up. Now that we've extracted Mirage Server to a vanilla JS package, the question is, how can people use that? You realize how much work goes in the Ember ecosystem to make that sort of thing easy. But now that it can be used in we've been pairing with people and using Mirage in like React apps and Vue apps. And so you need to provide like a version of it that works in different situations. And so we've been learning all about rollup and all this stuff. And it's been painful, but I think something that I used to think was true was that it's good to have other people do all that stuff for you. But now getting to a point where we're working on this thing in the wider ecosystem, I was kind of frustrated that I had never really set up Babel myself. I had never really set up ESLint myself. There's so much about NPM that I've been able to avoid. Basically, there's so many of those things I haven't had to learn, which is great. Because basically the Ember ecosystem has sheltered me from that, and like in a good way, that other people have taken on those responsibilities, and it's made my life a lot easier. Except that now it's like those things aren't truly abstracted away from modern JavaScript development. So now that we have to learn them, you feel like you have to catch up in a lot. You feel like there's like 4 years of, of JavaScript you have to learn. Yeah. Oh, why is UMD a lie? Why does rollup exist when Webpack exists? Like, they're both module bundlers. Like, why do they both exist, and why are people using both of them? What's the boundary between these tools? Yeah. And then like the overlap between, when you're using just Babel, rollup, ESLint, and then you have packages that are ESLint Babel, just ESLint runner, just Babel, rollup Babel plugin, right? So every there's like the shortest path between all of them. You have a new package for each one of them. And I think, it's hard, right? I was listening to the Bike Shed podcast from Thoughtbot, and they were talking about Rails and magic in Rails. And Chris was saying that, when he started, he really appreciated the magic because it let him feel really productive. But over time, he's grown to like wish for more explicitness, because when the magic doesn't work and you have to dive into it, you have this feeling that I've felt. It's good to feel that sometimes, because it's not a good feeling. But there's definitely a trade-off there. He's like, maybe Rails could just generate some code and like put it in there instead of like trying to hide it all away from you, right? But yeah, it's just a hard trade-off, right?
It's interesting because part of me wants to say like, yeah, just stay in Ember. Just stay in Ember and never.
Yeah, part of me wants to say that
and
too.
never ever deal with any of these problems.
Have to, right?
Yeah, you don't.
Right.
But I think there's interesting thing. It's like, well, the reality of being a JavaScript developer today means that you have to. There will be times where you're outside of Ember.
Yeah, and also like if Ember cares about staying relevant and wants to grow its user base, then that's not a good thing because we've seen that Ember is not. Ember is already needing to make changes to meet modern JavaScript developers where they're at, and so it's just not true that there's enough folks who have bought into the Ember vision to like self-sustain it on its own. We want more people to use Ember. Ember wants more people to use Ember. So if it were true that like the current set of Ember developers was all anyone working on Ember cared about, then you could make that argument, but that's not true. You know what I'm saying?
I mean, couldn't an answer here be
if you're just making Ember for current Ember users, that's fine, but you're not.
Couldn't the answer be like, look, one of the great things about Ember is you don't ever have to know these tools. So quit your job and start writing Ember and never open one of these configs again. But I
yeah, that's true.
I'm especially after going through what we went through the last few weeks, I'm not sure that you can be a JavaScript developer and not know these tools. I think that, companies have apps and
I mean, you can be an Ember developer and not ever know how to set up Babel or ESLint.
Sure. But I think that,
there's something beautiful about that.
There are companies out there that they're not just Ember. They have an Ember app, they have a Vue app, they have a React app.
Yeah.
And
you can be a web developer and not know how to set up a socket or something like that, right? So there's like those things. But this is the point, right? Is that these things are not like these new tools that are coming out are not being abstracted away and hidden away from us,
Yeah, and I think
whereas you could say in Rails, like you could stay a Rails developer and not know how to do something that a Ruby server developer would have to know how to do.
Sure, you can be a Rails developer and never deal with Rack or something.
Yeah, exactly. So that's fine.
But I don't think...
And it wouldn't be like irresponsible to tell someone, oh, you should be learning Rack over time because eventually in your Rails career, like, right? That's not the same thing.
Right.
It's different.
I think my take is more that being a JavaScript developer means you're going to have a whole bunch of different apps for reasons like...
Yeah, JavaScript's way more dynamic. It's using way more context. It's moving faster.
It's moving faster. People at your organization, even if you're like the diehard Ember fan, people in your organization are going to introduce React apps. And,
Ember didn't win the framework wars, right? The framework wars are not over or whatever. Like there's still new ideas coming out. We're not done building UI frameworks. So given all those things, whereas like, is anyone going to start a new Ruby on Rails? Like, is anyone going to start a new server-side API framework in Ruby?
So, someone will. Yes, yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Right. The Rails is the last Rails.
Yeah.
And
Ember is not the last UI framework.
Right.
React's not the last UI framework.
Right.
I would be confident saying. So anyways, that's kind of interesting. And what was the point of all this? The point of all this is like...
You're saying that like you feel like it's almost a disservice to hide these things.
Yeah, almost, yeah.
Because now you've felt unequipped.
Right.
That you've gone off into the big world.
Right. And also that there might be a way you end up with some incidental complexity when you try to hide these things from your users. So for example, Ember CLI Tailwind builds Tailwind for your Ember app, but there's times where you need to do different things with it. For example, in add-on docs, we need to build a custom version of Tailwind that's scoped and has a prefix so we don't collide with people's names. So now Ember CLI Tailwind has to expose a build Tailwind broccoli plugin that you have to learn how to use, that I have to learn how to use, wrote it for myself, but other people can use it too. Point being, I wanted, when you make add-ons like that, or when Ember is working and trying to, the parallel is like Ember is trying to do the work of setting up Babel and ESLint for its users. You are trying to make it so they don't have to learn that stuff, but then you run into situations, and so maybe it would have been better from the beginning. Like Ember CLI Tailwind, I don't even understand how, based on the use cases that people have now, I think that add-on shouldn't exist. So we're basically probably going to deprecate it and teach people how to use the thing. Because if you set up Tailwind in a React or a Vue app, you just use the thing. It's post CSS. So you have a post CSS config file and you wire it up. And so there's some work we can do, but at the end of the day, yeah, it's just back to like how fast can they get to the installation instructions on Tailwind's site and do it themselves? Because there's just so many benefits to that, right? First of all, like they're understanding the tool. If they go outside of Ember and they're like want to make a Vue app and now they want to use Tailwind, they're like, oh wait, in Ember I just have this one line command that I use to get Tailwind in my app, and it's awesome that that's one line command, but at the same time it's the same thing that I'm going through, right? Where they don't feel like, okay, how do I set this up? Now I have to do all this wiring. And you know what I'm saying?
I do. And the wiring thing is, I think we talked about this before, but the wiring thing we might be
overestimating the cost.
Like,
yeah.
Because setting up Jest in a few projects, it's like, okay, I've got to copy and paste configs, but hey, everyone's doc site, they do a good job telling me just paste this in.
And this is where, like, back to the thing where especially folks in Ember community used to say, like, you know, we've seen teams spend lots of time setting up Webpack config. And so that's like all wasted time. That's not really it's not the full story, because yeah, it's in some sense it's wasted. In another sense, they have a lot more flexibility in a year from now when everything's changed, whereas you don't, right?
Right.
So again, it's trade-offs, but and to be fair to the Ember story, the Ember model, you know, the magic model, it's true that Jest has good docs about copying config files in your apps, but what about when you use Jest and Babel and ESLint and Rollup? There's nowhere to go. Like, we're looking at React routers, GitHub source, and trying to understand that. So that's not good. That's not in a guide somewhere. Yes. So it's the interaction between these things that make things hard. And it's a huge testament to the infrastructure work that goes on in Ember that we've been able to use, you know, Ember concurrency with generators before generators worked, and I've never had to set that up myself, and now I'm having to like install a regenerator thing. You know what I'm saying? It's like,
dude, just the fact that we don't even think about how to build a test app. Like, the tests for our app, we don't ever have to think about.
That ESLint automatically adds failing tests to our app. Like, just there's so many things that are really, really pleasant, but it's like you got to meet people where they're at, and you have to face the reality that people are working in they're working in this multi-paradigm environment. And so your tools shouldn't try to replace that reality. They should work inside of it. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Now, I wonder if this, like, okay,
multi-paradigm reality.
Do we lose, like, one of the great things is, like, upgrading Ember has been easy. Right? Upgrading Ember apps has...
It's a good question.
Do we lose things like that if we go down this road?
Where the dependencies aren't, like, working in concert with each other or whatever. Yeah, I have no idea. But I know that you have to meet people where they're at.
Yes.
To me, that's become, like, the number one thing. You can't sacrifice that. And if people are like at a point where they're like, I'm tired of doing all this stuff myself, I want you to do it for me, even if it means I'm a year or two behind the cutting edge, then that's fine.
Right.
But that's not what people are saying.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Also, too, that's totally been, I mean, I know you've been struggling with this. I got to do the initial setup, and I got to walk away when the problem got hard.
When our UMD build broke IE11.
Yeah, the setup hasn't been... I don't know how it all works. I don't know the boundaries, but it hasn't been the big problem.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. No, it's like a pain in the ass for the last week or two, but no, it's going to be a thing that gets set up and we're going to learn. It's just that we're condensing our learning, but eventually we're going to learn it and it's going to be fine.
Yep.
And it's also a good spot to be like flexible when new things come out. So, but yeah, basically all that to say, like Ember CI Tailwind, in retrospect, it would have been better to invest the effort into making it as easy as possible. You know, like basically auto import is a better use of effort to make it easy for Ember to integrate directly with these packages than to try to wrap it and hide the magic and hide what's going on.
Nice.
I think that's like one way to put it.
Yeah, maybe using the Tailwind example, it's like, oh, it's really great. You Ember install Ember CLI Tailwind, you have Tailwind set up, you have rebuild set up, you have these configuration files, but then Tailwind 1.0 comes out, right. And now, like, okay, you didn't pay a fixed cost of setting it up, or you didn't pay a cost of setting it up, but now this is a flexibility that you've lost.
Right.
And so that's the trade-off.
Right. And like maybe it would be different if we were like completely laser focused on that. We were working at a TED or at something like that where we were all using that and we were maintaining all the time.
Yeah, I mean, maybe if there were, 100,000 more Ember developers.
Yeah, exactly.
The reality is it's not.
Totally. So that's the thing. And it's like
meeting users where they're at.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yep. So you want to think about that. You want to think about that stuff ahead of time. You get an idea for something or you're trying to think about the best way to do something. What happens when X changes? What happens when someone wants to use a different version of Pretender with what I'm using? What happens if they want to make this portable and use it elsewhere? So it goes back to all that kind of thing,
Yeah.
Scope, all that stuff. Anyways, that's all I have to say about that. Hooks versus components, I guess that's what we were talking about.
Yeah, I had one comment on this. I was, did you see Static Kit, Derek's new thing? Mm-hmm. Statickit.com? Is that
yes?
So it's like hooks for a React app. I think there's a just JavaScript version, but there's like hooks for a React app where you can build a form that just saves data to his website, and it's a service. I was looking at that, and it was incredibly readable. And I was wondering, does this have to do with like the hooks API that he came up with? It's just like I knew what was going on
from just 8 lines of code.
From his samples, it was you write your own HTML, but you use a hook to get all the behavior, I guess is the term. I was using in an Ember app, I was like adding an Ember add-on that did a whole bunch of stuff, and it uses a component, and you drop the component in the template and it just works. It like does all this stuff for the template. I didn't really know what was going on with that. And it made me think like,
so you like the hooks example in terms of how it disambiguates between what's his and what's yours.
Yeah. It was very clear what was going on where if you drop a component in a template from an add-on, you don't know what you don't know. It's like, is that like a tagless component?
Yeah.
Now there's sometimes you're working with like a UI framework and you drop their button component into your template and you don't care if that thing's a button tag or like a div with a span with a button, all that. You don't really care what that thing is. But there's other times where this app that I was working on, I needed to know what the HTML being inserted was. And it just made me think, it was like, yeah, there are times where...
Yep. The boundary, the abstraction, it's not clear.
Yeah. So it's just a little...
You opt into a lot when you wrap something in a component.
Yes.
You're like, it's a big change.
Yeah.
Potentially.
And most components are well-behaving and you don't have to think about it. But it was just, there was something really nice about his landing page. I just knew.
That's good.
I just knew exactly what was going to happen.
I think it's a testament to the composability story of hooks, which is like part of the reason for the whole design, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I like that.
That's cool. Very cool. Very cool. There's something else I was going to say. I can't remember, but let's get to the questions. Yeah.
Sure.
So I think one of them was about, what was I going to say? I had a thought. I can't remember. One of them was from Dave about FastBoot. Do you remember what it was?
No.
Okay.
I actually didn't. I kind of scanned these, but I didn't want to look at them because I want to answer them here.
Just off the cuff?
Yeah.
Extemporaneous style. We've been using Pair with Tuple. It's pretty awesome. I would definitely recommend people check it out. You can pair for free with someone who has an account. We have an account. I know I used to use Screen Hero to pair with Rob and other people in the Ember community, and I know that people were sad when Screen Hero left because people are just generous in Ember, and on Discord we'll jump on with people and pair with them. So I think I was trying to tell Ben that would be an awesome, not only good for him to get more exposure to companies and paying customers, but like good for open source people to have just a one-click thing and you jump on. It's really cool.
Yeah.
They added video to it. It's really awesome.
How is a pairing, the fact that it's made for pairing.
Yeah.
So I imagine like the keyboard sharing and mouse sharing is good.
Yeah. Like when I go in and I do it, and I pair with some people on Slack sometimes, and you try to do it and then you try to alt tab. Oh wait, it doesn't work.
It's so bad.
You know, some clicks are slow or something
but
like that.
It's not made for pairing.
Yeah.
Which is the frustrating thing about the Slack screen share.
Right. So Tuple is, you click on it, you're in it, you just see a red box around your screen that goes away, and you're like, it's like full screen mode basically, and you can just click. You want to point something out, you just click on it and you start typing, and you can alt tab. You can do a mode where they can see your mouse. So like, how when you and I pair, we're looking at the same thing, and you can just like use the mouse. Sometimes it's just really nice to use the mouse to point out something. You can do that on their monitor. So yeah, it's really
cool.
It's like a subtle thing. It's really, really cool. So there's also little things like that are optimized for like the pairing use case. So
I love that. I mean, there's something so nice about where this is a problem we're solving. Screen share for pairing.
Yes. Yep. So that's definitely really cool. I think they're going to open it up to public, like either in August at some point.
Nice.
But yeah, we're trying to do more pairing with seeing what Mirage is like in like other apps and stuff. So I tweeted about this, and I have been doing some calls, and I have some more set up. But if anyone is listening and wants to try Mirage out in a non-Ember app who's listening, send me a message and we can set that up too. So Dave said, one of our biggest lessons so far using Ember FastBoot is that FastBoot, or server-side rendering in general really, makes bugs that were previously isolated to the one user by virtue of executing on their browser only suddenly a problem for all users everywhere. FastBoot is actually pretty good at isolating well-behaved app code in the FastBoot environment, but it can't escape the underlying Node.js reality, which is that it's sharing system resources. All of a sudden, any kind of resource contention bug becomes a problem for every user, not just the one who experienced it. Those kind of bugs move from, we should take a look at those rollbar logs this week, to production is on fire and the site is unusable. Sound familiar?
Yeah, that's... Is there more? Or is that...
That's it, yeah.
That's really great. That's absolutely true. I mean, this is memory leaks in an Ember app. I tend just not to care about because people refresh the page.
Right. Yeah,
but,
refresh Twitter, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Twitter bugs is buggy and I just refresh it.
But that's not true on our server. Our server isn't going to refresh.
Yeah.
So those memory leaks are one of the things that really bit us when we first got into FastBoot.
Mm-hmm. What did we do to solve it? Up the memory?
No, so we have something that...
there was a point in time where we like really changed it because what we originally had was good, but it was tiny.
Yeah.
It was your whole thing like Ember is made to run on like a modern MacBook.
Yes.
And that's not what our servers are.
No, our server's 512 megabytes. I think we're up to like a gig now.
Yeah.
So yeah, we probably did up it. What we do, so to answer this is one thing we do, well, we no longer run FastBoot at runtime.
Right.
But when we did run FastBoot at runtime, we had an express middleware called Worker Killer. So FastBoot app server, or if you write your own app server node, you're going to spawn off worker instances to handle those requests. And the whole idea is if like a worker encounters an error, it's not going to take down your process isn't going to crash. The worker is going to crash. The parent process, I think they call it like the master process, is just going to spin up a new worker. So your thing doesn't go down. Now your workers might like crash, might get spun up again. You might get like in a bad spot there, but your thing isn't going to, your app server is never going to die.
On account of trying to generate a FastBoot page.
Right. Your workers might die,
right,
but the actual app server itself won't. So we have a thing called Worker Killer where all of our workers, when they boot up, they get a random number between 100 and 200. And when they serve that many requests, they die. And the idea is that like the master process should like load balance between the workers. I think we run like 4 workers. So the idea is like, one does one, the other does one, the other does one, then 2, 2, 2, then 3, 3, 3, whatever. So we don't want to just stop all the workers after they've served 100 requests, because then they would like kind of all go down at once. So we generate a random number after you've served that many requests. The master process, actually the child process, is told like you will exit once you've served 150 requests, and it's going to die and then spin up. So that's like a way to like kind of like build in a refresh to your server rendered
right
to your server rendered app.
Turn it off and on again.
Yeah, seriously, turn it off and on again. So that's worked well. Cleaning up memory leaks in the Ember app was also kind of helped there. But like definitely it's really good. Like you do share.
Yeah.
Like when you're writing an Ember app, you're thinking about the app running on the user's
single
browser.
User session. Yeah. In the context of their device.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're not thinking about the shared thing on the server. So definitely. Yeah. Just like monitoring it, restarting it. Monitoring was like,
insightful.
Also too, like there's a thing now like about like observability, which is super interesting. So like you can like monitor your app. So you have like, you track like memory usage and requests and all this data about your FastBoot instance. But like when you encounter a FastBoot bug, like how do you actually go ahead and fix it? And the idea is like, well, I try to like recreate the scenario locally, but that's like, you know, our dev environment, like Ember CLI FastBoot is very different than FastBoot App Server.
Mm-hmm.
So like recreating your production environment locally, there's like a lot of steps involved. And so like you can look at the logs, maybe the logs will tell you something, but generally you're just trying to figure out what went wrong, like recreate that scenario in like Ember CLI FastBoot. Like sometimes you're like setting up a new app server and like poking around. Maybe you're like deploying code with like console logs because you know that this part of the page crashed. I think good question is like how, given that you're running an Ember app on the server and you run into like bugs, how could you have found this bug you just fixed without having to deploy new code, without having to pull the code down? And it's not just about like logging memory usage or requests or stuff like that. Like what could you actually do to know what this bug was? And I think if you like start to do that a few times, you'll I think you like make your code base more robust. So like one thing we did is like we have like a viewer. I have a viewer where I can view all the HTML that FastBoot generated. So when I get like a crash, I can actually go in and see the HTML from that response. I also get other things, like I get like all the headers that were sent. So I can see like the user agents and anything that might have just tripped up Ember, because we do some header introspection. I also get like request time, and so I can follow requests. But like this sort of stuff, like when I started doing FastBoot, I didn't have any of this.
Right.
And so this was the stuff like built up to monitor this. So
right. Interesting.
Yeah.
Also, I think that you would say, if you were talking to someone or giving kind of your opinion, your advice, first question is like, why are you introducing FastBoot? And then second, like, if we don't even run FastBoot at runtime, you know, basically if you were starting a new app today and it had to be Ember and you had some need that for server-side rendering, what would your approach be, given what we've learned with FastBoot, also with our experience with Gatsby?
Yeah, I mean, I would have to know, like, it's exactly what you said. Why are we running FastBoot? Why do we need server-side rendering? And there's a giant...
And if it's for speed, then...
There's a giant decision tree there.
Yeah.
Yeah, for speed, but it depends.
Probably
it depends.
not,
Is there a lot of dynamic content?
Yeah. How fresh does the content have to be? Has it changed and stuff?
I'm happy with where we ended up, where we have a cache with dynamic data, the cache resets, but we don't have a lot of like user generated data in there. So like GitHub, imagine if like GitHub was cached every time someone signed up, they'd have to like cache, they have to create a new page of that person's profile, where we don't have that problem. Right. So serving faster from cache like works great for us.
Right. And we could apply a lot of the lessons from Gatsby to a site like EmberMap that changes a handful of times a week, and it would be a huge benefit. Like it would be massively more simple.
Yeah, I think that, you know, when we built EmberMap, if Gatsby was around, that would definitely, you know, I mean, it's Ember.
If Prember was around, we would try to see if that would be a similar kind of experience where we could just do a static generation to give us server rendered, pre-rendered pages on the server. Using our Ember code, but that way... Yeah,
the problem with Prember, why Prember doesn't work for us, is because we still need information about the incoming request. So we need to know, like, is this user an admin?
Well, that would also be a problem for Gatsby.
Yes. So we would have to...
We could do a lot with our site without knowing that stuff. We could build it in such a way... Well, first of all, the real reason we did it in the first place was to literally get...
OG tags.
So we could do that with Prember, no problem. You could just have a part of the block, part of the only part that you render
be the OG tag.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, we could do this.
And then we would build up over time to get more and more of the content in the pre-rendered side.
You know, I think I went down this road with FastBoot where I was just going to have it do that. And I just ran into all these problems where...
I mean, it's nice what we have now, I got to say. It just cost you 2 years of blood, sweat, and tears. From my perspective, it's great that we can have like 3 versions of the site rendered for our different classes of users. I mean, it's fast. It's like it loads fast, really fast. It's awesome. The cache bus automatically when I make an edit in our admin, like it's awesome. But so I'm just saying the walking the line between the full Gatsby model, which is fully build time dependent, has no access to those kind of dynamic runtime. Now you could do the same thing. You could make user buckets and make different GraphQL requests in your based on those.
Generate 3 HTML files
exactly.
per page.
Yeah, exactly. I think
server rendering's tough. Like
it's also like, is it worth it? Something I'm going to want to do with Mirage, which I'm curious when we get there, because I do want to do this, is replicate our data modeling stuff with Ember CLI Mirage and add-on docs rather, and Ember data, because I think for a documentation page, it makes sense to load the whole thing on the first request basically and have it synchronously available. Like that just seems like a perfect use case. Again, when I was on the airplane and I load the doc site, it should be offline. Like that stuff is actually a pretty reasonable to want that in a doc site. And I just think it's better than like, going back and forward and searching, all that being like synchronous and instant, like on the site. So, and it shouldn't be that hard. It's just not that, conceptually, it's not that hard.
Right.
We've done it a million times now. So we should be able to do it with our Gatsby site and our React site where like we query all the data needed or whatever. So I'm just curious how that's going to work. But I forget why I said that.
I think it will work well.
Sorry, I was saying the reason I even said that right then is because we were talking about like server rendering, and server rendering is hard and stuff, and sometimes it's not worth it. And I know like Ryan Florence, other folks have said like it's just like really complex. I agree. Like runtime server rendering for a client app is like super complex. And to me, it's even better if I have to wait a second or whatever, and in the worst case, but then I get your entire site and it's instant Dockyard blog example or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
So I'd rather build that and give up the server rendering stuff, except for the OG tags or whatever. But like, I don't really care about, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's good to server render, but if I had to choose one or the other,
again, I think this is like what problem are you solving? You're solving the problem of like I have a doc site. I want it to be really fast to navigate. And
people pull it up all the time. I don't
care about a second to load.
Yeah, exactly.
And so server rendering is
and
not
the data
good.
changes once every whatever release. Basically, right? Which is like maybe a couple times a week or something like that. So to me, it's like I'd rather have the whole thing, load up all the API documentation in memory, have React render everything in memory, have it be instant back and forward and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
To me, that's worth giving up the server. I would rather invest effort in that than the server rendering.
Yeah.
Although we get server rendering for free with Gatsby, which is cool. Free. I mean, mostly free. We have to like adjust some things, but basically it's done for us. So that's also pretty cool. But once you're in one of those pages, I just want to stay in the React app.
Yes.
And even for the API stuff, like just do the full API, load the whole payload up front. Boom.
Yep. I don't see anything wrong with that. Like I totally don't.
Cool. Let's see if there was any more questions we should get to. I'm tired today. I'm still recovering from watching this horror movie. Wait, it's not a horror movie. Midsummer. If anyone catches me at a conference and saw the movie Midsummer by Ari Aster and wants to talk about it, please do. Because Ryan won't watch these movies with me.
Nope.
There was relays principles for declarative data fetching. Maybe we can talk about that some other time. Also, I was thinking this API article, APIs are about policy. Maybe like next podcast episode, we can just read that together and talk about it.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
I mean, really, because like there's a lot of really interesting stuff in there. It's about REST. It's about GraphQL. I think it would be interesting to do that.
Nice.
New JavaScript features, coalesce operator and stuff like that. I guess we should look into that stuff and maybe we can talk about it next time because there's some like the coalesce. What is that? And then the question or the or question mark thing. Was it or question mark? It was like
I think there's like question mark.
Is that right? Where it does the thing that Getify was tweeting about. Remember?
Yeah, it's like you can do. You know how like how you write a function that takes options and you want to provide a default options.
Yes.
So you do like let local options equals passed in options, pipe, like or, and then the default options. And that way that if no one passes in options, you'll use the default options. That works well, but you get into some spots with it where like, what if they pass in false?
Oh yeah.
So now they've declared they want false
logging, right?
But you have
to do like
it fails
undefined.
Or like I know in Storefront we do like some has-own property stuff, and like we're just trying to figure out like did they pass in nothing or did they pass in false?
Yeah.
And so I think the question mark operators is basically like looks for undefined. And only undefined, or it looks for null and only null, something like that. But
that's pretty cool.
But it will, if you do like false question mark true, it will return false,
right?
Because the thing is actually set to false,
right?
So that's
cool. So maybe we'll look up some other ones and see what new things are coming down. Last question was just about web components. We talked a little bit about this last week. My impression from the Twitter sphere and the people I talked to is that everyone feels about the same as they did 4 years ago, which is that, there's some use cases for web components if you're in a big company that has like React and Ember and Vue apps to share some of that stuff. But most people are going to keep most of their logic in the components of the native framework because of all the benefits you get from that. So
like the interop.
Yeah, exactly.
Didn't you look into this like a while ago, like a couple of years ago? But
for Glimmer,
wasn't the idea if we were going to use a web component, we'd have to like do it in JavaScript?
Yeah. This goes back to like attributes versus properties, and do the frameworks have ways of like doing that? Yeah, there was like some things you could only do via JavaScript. Add event listener was a big one of them, actually. That's like the best. That's why it's great that we have on now, but like I don't know where the other frameworks are in that, but that's a good way for like custom events. Like if you have a form and you want to emit a custom event that's like did save, so that anyone can hook into, because if you made a form in React and you have expose like a did save callback, then you can use that. But how do you do that in a way that like an Ember developer can do? Action did save or whatever on did save. You'd have to use like add event listener is the JavaScript way to do that, and it works everywhere because it's just JavaScript custom events and all. But again, this is all just like people theorizing, and no one's doing this today. So that would be interesting if all the frameworks did that. That was the idea with like the Glimmer component compiling to a web component and saying that the lowest common denominator is add event listener. I think it's also what like Polymer does or suggests, or the web component guys suggest, is like, yeah, if you just do this, then like anyone should be able to do this because this is like base platform level APIs. And but I don't see people really doing this. Now there's this really cool library Stencil that is coming from I think some of the guys who worked on one of these Angular UI frameworks. I really like the people who work on this, and I follow them on Twitter. And I just really like kind of some of their talks that I've seen and the way they conduct themselves, and some of the Ionic framework, and I think this is about building reusable JavaScript web components, and I think they compile down to web components, like actual standards-based web components that run everywhere, and it's basically intended to be used in like if you have a React app and a Vue app, you could use your Stencil UI library in both places. But are people using this? No one I know. I mean, it looks like a big project, obviously, but like, this is not like a JavaScript-wide thing that everyone's doing, right? This is like their take on how to share component code across. It's kind of what Glimmer was maybe toying with being 2 years ago when we were working on this.
If I have one of these components and I want to attach a click handler to it,
has 6,000 stars.
It's a lot. If I have one of these components and I want to attach a click handler to it, if I'm working in a React app or an Ember app.
If you're in an Ember app, I think on would actually work.
On would work.
Yeah. So which is pretty awesome. Like you could literally render it like.
That's really cool.
Yeah. You could material accordion on close, like on close. And it's like a close is a custom native event that it emitted.
Because what on is going to do is on, when it evaluates, is going to actually call add event listener on that element that it's inside of.
Yeah.
Okay, that's cool.
Isn't that neat? But it's super neat.
Okay, so that argument, that makes me feel better about using web components
Yes.
in an Ember app.
To-do list, event, to-do completed, event emitter. The code above will dispatch a custom DOM event called to-do completed. Listen detector, target, passive capture, keyboard events. Using events in JSX. Within a stencil compiled application or component, you can also bind listeners to events directly in JSX. This works very similar to normal DOM events such as on click. Let's use our to-do list component from above. On to-do completed. So they have a compiler that will build you a JSX version.
That's okay. That's what I was missing.
That's what they're doing. Listening to events from a non-JSX element. And then they show an example, to-do list element, document query selector to-do list, add event listener to-do completed. So they have to make an exception for JSX. And so they have a specific code path in their compiler that will return you a version. Okay, so this is what you have to do. So
is it like they
you have
compile?
to use our component class from above, and you import event and event emitter. You have to do something. You have to use this event emitter thing. But basically, like, you have to do something because React has its own like synthetic events model. Like on click is not just sugar for add event listener click. It's like actually doing React's own event stuff. So this was like one of the original arguments that like this is going to come back to bite React because they fundamentally don't interop with, but it doesn't really matter because React is solving problems in other ways that people care more about. But that is a cool aspect of things like Vue and Ember, I think, because they use templates that are like supersets of HTML and work with native events. I think rendering a stencil component in an Ember template and adding a custom event handler would feel really cool, and it would work just the way we do it with like click on a button. So that's pretty awesome.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Also, too, if there was just an extra compile step to get the JSX web
compatible version,
yeah, that's
deal.
fine.
Especially if they're like maintaining it, and that's part of their value proposition. So
yeah, because so without that, you end up writing a whole bunch of JavaScript.
Yeah, you still have to use their thing. There was like 2 lines of JavaScript there where you have to import their thing and do it to make it so that it works.
You would import that into your React component?
Yes, that's
a bummer.
It is a bummer. Yeah, it is a bummer. Yeah, it is. So, but you have to do that because there's no way to call add event listener on a element rendered by React because it's not an element. It's like a call to React create element, and it's like reconciled in the virtual DOM. You know what I'm saying? It's
right.
Yeah. So kind of interesting though. Anyways, I don't know why the person was asking about web components. To me, they're like an interesting thing to kind of keep your ear open to how they develop, but they're not something that I see any of the teams we consult with, any of the people asking us questions are using for anything practical. Like they're not interested in solving the problems that the other frameworks are solving in a lot of ways. There's obviously been like some historical hostility kind of between those camps, and by and large, like again, the kind of circles that we run in, like people are using frameworks to build their applications, and so they're not really concerned with web components at this point.
Yeah, the only time I've ever considered it is when you need to share code across 2 different frameworks,
right?
And even then, we didn't.
Yeah, we didn't do
so,
it. Yeah. All right. So maybe next week we can talk about APIs. We need
to build
APIs.
HTTP APIs.
HTTP.
Nice.
The article about REST and GraphQL.
Let's do that.
Yeah.
Maybe we can put that in the show notes
so people can read it ahead of time.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good idea.
Be a read along.
Yep. That's great. Papers We Love. There's like this meetup group and like organization called Papers We Love talks about reading academic papers, and
cool.
We'll do a mini version of that. All right. That's it. We'll see you next week.
Bye.